Today, she has a piece in the Washington Post titled "How the Far Right Spread Politically Convenient Lies About the Notre Dame Fire." She says, as the conflagration spread through the ancient timbers of Notre Dame's cathedral attic on Monday, a parallel fire was spreading on social media. This one was willfully set, a series of conspiracy theories neatly slotted into pre-existing cultural biases. And soon enough, willing believers were aflame with hate. The conspiracy theorizing began almost as soon as the blaze did, right when people saw the shocking, transfixing video of the cathedral's spire toppling. While French authorities began to assert almost immediately that the fire was apparently accidental, the brief gap between the startling image's generation and their explication was enough for far-right figures to exploit with their own sinister insinuations. Their prevailing view was nearly identical and apparently completely false, that the fire was deliberate and was probably set by Muslims. And then she quotes several people who suggest that the fire might not have happened accidentally. And there are certain people who suggested that perhaps this was Muslims. And then she says this: many figures on the right took the opportunity to turn Notre Dame into a metonym for Western civilization as a whole, intimating that far more than a cathedral was in peril. Just as the fire hit social media, conspiracy theorist and brain supplement salesman Mike Cernovich dramatically tweeted, "The West has fallen." And here's where it gets good. Shortly thereafter, fast-talking far-right pundit Ben Shapiro, that's the only description that they take of me these days, radical conservative or far-right. The Economist calls me a radical conservative after falsely labeling me alt-right. And now, this dolt writing in the pages of the Washington Post suggests that I am a far-right pundit. But that's not all she suggests. She says, shortly thereafter, fast-talking far-right pundit Ben Shapiro called Notre Dame a monument to Western civilization and Judeo-Christian heritage. Now, that seems pretty unambiguous and pretty inoffensive, right? I mean, I said that it was a monument to Western civilization and Judeo-Christian heritage. Yesterday on the podcast, I did a 15-minute segment all about the history of Notre Dame as well as its place within the Judeo-Christian river of history. But Talia Levin is very upset about this. She writes, shortly thereafter, fast-talking far-right pundit Ben Shapiro called Notre Dame a monument to Western civilization and Judeo-Christian heritage. Given the already raging rumors about potential Muslim involvement, these tweets evoked the specter of a war between Islam and the West that is also part of numerous far-right narratives. It was a central thread in the manifesto of the alleged Christchurch, New Zealand shooter. She names him, I won't. On Tuesday, Shapiro called this article simply gross and said he called Notre Dame a monument to Western civilization because it is, not because of malicious intent. She puts this back in parentheses. That is a late addition to the article. She then juxtaposes me with Richard Spencer, an actual white supremacist and white nationalist. She says, Richard Spencer, professional racist and coiner of the term alt-right, openly advocated for such warfare, stating and misspelling his hopes that the fire would spur the white man into action to seize power in his country, in Europe, in the world, and declaring such an insurgence a glorious purpose. And as BuzzFeed's Jane Litvinenko reported, other more oblique figures managed to go even further from provocation in the abstract to more concrete incitement. And then she talks about how Ilhan Omar has been slandered and how terrible it is. And then she ends with this. She says, by Tuesday morning, French authorities had declared the fire extinguished. The structure of Notre Dame is intact, although its spire, a 19th century edition, collapsed. But the conflagration of conspiracy, a corruption of the natural human tendency to assign meaning to events, rages through our information sphere unchecked. It should not take the imprecations of journalists to restrain this dangerous flow of misinformation. It is past time that those who stoke inflammatory rhetoric, knowing its potential to catalyze racist violence, were made to stop playing with fire before it's too late to control the inferno. So she finishes by calling for censorship. So, in other words, I say that Notre Dame is a Judeo-Christian symbol and a symbol of Western civilization. She suggests that I'm calling for war with Muslims based on that extraordinarily anodyne tweet. And then she suggests that I must be silenced because I am participating in a dangerous flow of misinformation. And then she blames me for violence. So hilariously enough, she says all of this. I tweet out how dumb this is because it is perfectly obvious what I meant in my original tweets. I talked about it repeatedly. Nowhere in my original tweet thread or anywhere else have I suggested that Muslims were behind the burning of Notre Dame because the evidence suggests that is not the case. That is not what the French government has said. Okay, all of this prompted Media Matters, the former employer for this not very nice person, Talia Levin, to tweet at me. Why? Well, because she had tweeted also that she thanked Media Matters for gathering information so she could write that column, which just demonstrates, by the way, where Media Matters lies in the sort of information complex for the mainstream media. Media Matters is a left-wing group founded by David Brock in coordination with John Podesta and Hillary Clinton right before Hillary Clinton ran for the Senate in 2000. It has long been a font for Clintonista hackery, and its main mission is basically to knock right-wing people off the air, to knock conservatives off the air. Media Matters has for years been funded by members of the Democratic Party left and higher echelon people on the left, specifically to dig up garbage on people on the right and then to try to initiate fake secondary boycotts against advertisers. They did this to Tucker Carlson. They've done it to Laura Ingraham. They've done it to Rush Limbaugh. They've done it to Sean Hannity. They've done it to they're a 501c3 group. They certainly do not act like a 501c3 nonprofit. They're a horrible organization designed specifically to smear their own political opponents and the political opponents of people like Hillary Clinton, and then to target advertisers who dare to spend their money with those people, even if those advertisers are not actually involved in promoting that show alone. So an advertiser can advertise on Tucker and also advertise on MSNBC. Media Matters targets the advertisers for Tucker. Media Matters, by the way, is so obviously partisan that after Joy Reid was hit with a bunch of allegations and, in fact, proof that she had said some terrible things in her past, Media Matters said that that was a hit job against Joy Reid. So Media Matters' only job is to create these long, giant files of supposedly terrible stuff that people on the right have said. So Talia Levin thanked Media Matters on her Twitter feed for helping her gather information for her crap column. And then I tweeted out that her crap column was, in fact, a crap column and that she was taking a tweet that was perfectly innocent and historically accurate, and then trying to link me to violence against Muslims on the basis of that, which is not only a stretch, it is a tearing apart of any semblance of logic or reason or honesty. So I tweet that out, and Media Matters tweets back at me from their corporate account, F you and the borough you wrote in on. So first of all, man, leave the borough out of it. Like, I don't know what the borough has to do with anything, but you leave that borough out of it. And I don't understand, honestly, what the reference is supposed to be to. Okay, then Media Matters tweets this out, trying to justify, so they start getting ratioed, which means people on Twitter point out how dumb this is, and that Media Matters is a garbage organization because they are. By the way, it is worthy of note. Media Matters is constantly quoted as a media watchdog. That's how it is termed constantly by the left-wing media, by the mainstream media. They are constantly calling Media Matters a media watchdogs, just as they called the Southern Poverty Law Center a racism watchdog. These are hardcore leftist groups with motivation. Media Matters proved it yesterday. F you and the borough you wrote in on for criticizing an opinion columnist in the pages of the Washington Post for basically throwing out slanderous material. Not legally slanderous, but in the generic sense. Media Matters didn't stop with suggesting that I F myself and also that they wanted to have sex with a donkey. They also continued by then trying to explain their way out of this. Right? So they tweeted out in the aftermath of this, they also tweeted, quote, some context. Talia Levin, a great writer who worked with us, has been on the receiving end of right-wing harassment for the better part of a year now, often spurred by spurious attacks on her work. So in other words, I am now inciting violence against her. So let's review the history. She attacked a disabled veteran and called him a Nazi and then deleted it. And when people got uptight, then it was incitement against her. She attacks me as someone who is supposedly calling for a war between Islam and the West, or a war on Muslims or blaming Muslims based on Notre Dame Cathedral, a thing that I have not done. And then Media Matters responds by suggesting that my criticism of her crap column means that I am now generating harassment against her. Some context, a great writer who worked with us has been on the receiving end of right-wing harassment for the better part of a year now, often spurred by spurious attacks on her work. All of this, by the way, is a demonstration of the incitement lie that the left keeps telling over and over and over, which is that anybody on the right who says anything at all is involved in incitement. And it doesn't stop there, because Media Matters then continues. They keep trying to double down on this thing. The first rule of holes, of course, is to stop digging, but Media Matters never stops digging. So here's what Media Matters tweets then, quote, some additional relevant context here. This is hours later. This is the jerk store routine from Seinfeld. You know, they owned themselves, they played themselves, and now they're desperately trying to spin their way out of their own stupidity. So they say some additional relevant context here. Indeed, the specific MMFA tweet response Ben is drumming up outrage about is unbecoming of and unusual for an organization as prestigious as MMFA. By the way, so I guess now they're members of Prestige International from Step Brothers. That's exciting. When an organization calls itself prestigious, you know they're not. Then they say, but, you see, it was actually a reference to, drumroll, Ben's own tweet on related matter. And then they go and they dig up a tweet from a month ago in which I suggested that if you call me alt-right, you ought to F yourself and F the horse you rode in on, which was directed, I read it at the time on the air, at The Economist, because The Economist suggested in their headline that I was the alt-right sage without the rage, which was another lie. So Media Matters is now trying to dig up times where I have used the F word online and then try to claim that they are making a callback reference rather than just being partisan hacks, which is what they are.